guys. Welcome back to another episode of Spooky Saturdays. I hope you're all having a lovely evening today. In this episode, I'm going to be reading a story called Grandma's Light is Always On. So without further ado, let's get started, and once again, I haven't read this, so we shall see if it's good or not. So yeah, let's get spooky. In one corner of my grandma's living room stood a lamp that was almost never turned off. She would change the bulb every week like clockwork, waiting until the afternoon sunlight poured through the windows and filled the room. Even then she hurried, holding her breath, until the deed was done and the lamp was back on. I would ask her about it once in a while. Each time she would smile softly, tussle my hair, and promptly change the subject. I didn't learn the truth until I was 13, the first time I turned the lamp off. I just wanted to see what would happen. Grandma screamed when she walked into the darkened room, a plate of cookies falling from her hands and crashing to the floor. I could hear her praying under her breath as she raged to turn the light back on. Tears were shining in her eyes when she turned to me, her lips pressed thin. Without warning, she slapped me hard across the face. Grandma had never so much as raised her voice before, and I was too shocked to cry. She cried enough for the both of us, gathering me up in her arms and begging me for forgiveness. With her face buried in my shoulder, she finally told me about the lamp. It was a ghost light, she said. Ever since she and my grandpa had bought the house, back when they first arrived in America, the spirits of the dead had plagued her. Only when her burden threatened to drive her mad did she ask Grandpa for help. She had expected him to laugh her out of the house, but he had surprised her by nodding gravely. It was he who first lit the ghost light, and as long as that beacon burned through the darkness, she had never seen another spirit. I stopped visiting my grandma's after that. It started gradually at first, missing a day here and there, but by the time I received her news of the death, I hadn't seen her in over 10 years. As her only living relative, I shouldn't have been surprised when I inherited her house. Yet as I sat in a lawyer's office listening to him read her will, I was speechless. I had a difficult time paying attention after that, absorbed as I was the business of remembering. So much love had filled those walls, so many happy memories. As I thought of my tiny, sterile apartment in the city, I quickly made my decision. I was almost overwhelmed by emotion as I walked through the front door. Everything looked exactly as I remember it from my childhood. Houseplants still glittered the window sills, decorative bird plates still hung on the walls, and the ghost light still burned in the living room. Seeing the old lamp sent a chill down my spine. I froze in my tracks, the smile fading from my lips, and I couldn't help but think of the night Grandma had slapped me so many years ago. I had told my mother about the ghost light the next day, but she had dismissed it as a simple old worldly superstition. It was the same way when she was growing up, she told me. I shouldn't worry about it. Still, I couldn't shake the conviction that I finally had seen the true depths of my grandma's lunacy. I ran my fingers through the fringe of the lampshade as I thought, a bloom of sadness darkening my nostalgia. Sighing heavily, I turned the ghost light off with a decisive click. Something woke me later that night. I lay in bed listening to the darkness until I heard scratching coming from the living room. Rats were the last thing I wanted to deal with at the moment, and I rolled over with a groan. Determined to ignore it until the morning, the scratching continued, intermittently eyes were solid black, bottomless pits that didn't reflect the moonlight. Her jaw hung impossibly open, unhinged, and the dark tunnel of her mouth spiraled down into her throat. I had a moment to realize who she was, to recognize the familiar map of wrinkles in her face, the curls of her wispy hair. Then my grandma screamed. I shrieked, stumbling backwards away from the nightmare in the corner. My arms flailed in the air, reaching for the nearest lamp, and my hands touched the ghost light. I yanked the chain, filling the room with light, and she was gone. I never turned off the ghost light after that. After letting the bulb burn out once, I began changing it every week, just as Grandma had. Eventually I got married, and luckily for me, my wife was tolerant of my strange fixation of the lamp. The light continued to burn, and I lived my happily life enough. But my grandson has been asking about the ghost light lately. Each time he asks, I smile softly, tussle his hair, and promptly change the subject. For some reason, I can't bring myself to tell him the truth. I think about how I pulled away from my grandma